Good evening to you and good evening everybody at home. We have a lot to get to tonight. President Trump will soon land in Buenos Aires, where he will tango, so to speak, with world leaders. But it is dinner on Saturday with the president of China that will be the main course. It is not getting that much coverage today, but there is intense focus everywhere on this man.
Now Michael Cohen could be the most dangerous witness to the president and his presidency in this Russia probe.
Michael Cohen could be the single most terrifying person for Donald Trump, the single most destructive person for Donald Trump.
So we will get to that story in a moment with Michael Caputo and with Jonathan Turley coming up. That story putting Vladimir Putin back in the spotlight today as well. The president dusted the Russian leader, will now not meet with him at the G20. Tweeting this: based on the fact that the ships and sailors have not been returned to Ukraine from Russia, I've decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting. Critics were quick to draw lines between that announcement and the news about Michael Cohen, but history may be more telling on this. Look no further than the G7 and NATO summits, where the president's approach to diplomacy was often characterized as a bull in a china shop. Only this time, it will not be President Putin's china shop that everyone has their eyes on. Rather, President Xi of China and the ongoing battle between our two countries for global military and economic supremacy. What happens between these two men may be the real defining story of the Trump presidency and foreign policy. This is likely the superpower showdown, ultimately, of our time. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts live in Buenos Aires tonight, where all of this is going down. Good evening, John.
Good evening to you, Martha, and you're absolutely correct. The meeting with President Xi on Saturday night was always the most important meeting. The fact that the president was going to meet with Vladimir Putin was also seen as a seminal moment for this upcoming G20. But really, the meeting, which will be at dinner on Saturday night between President Trump and President Xi, could well set the course for what the future relationship is, particularly trade between the United States and China. Larry Kudlow, who is the president's chief economic advisor, briefed us a couple of times earlier this week. He said the president has recently reopened dialogue with President Xi and that President Trump is optimistic that Saturday's meeting could lead to some sort of breakthrough. Not going to fix everything. This could be baby steps towards some sort of different trade relationship. But they are hopeful that something may begin to break loose on Saturday night. The president, though, playing a little hardball as he was leaving the White House this morning, saying if Xi does not want to forge a new trade agreement, well, he's fine with that. Listen here.
I think we're very close to doing something with China, but I don't know that I want to do it, because what we have right now is billions and billions of dollars coming into the United States in the form of tariffs or taxes. So I really don't know, but I will tell you that I think China wants to make a deal. I'm open to making a deal, but frankly, I like the deal we have right now.
Don't forget the tariffs on Chinese goods right now, and there's some $250 billion worth of Chinese goods that are subject to tariffs is 10%. That is scheduled to rise to 25% on the 1st of January, and the president has another tranche of $257 billion in Chinese goods that he is targeting for tariffs. U.S. officials say that they have been disappointed, that's the word they used, disappointed in how trade talks between China and the United States have been going. They say one of the big problems is China still claims to be a third world country, and because of that, they still need all the breaks that are afforded them under the World Trade Organization agreement. But consider this. China has an economy of $12 trillion a year. The United States, $19 trillion. China just $7 trillion behind. So the United States, the White House, doesn't see the need for all these WTO protections. Reforming the WTO rules has been a big topic at the ministerial meetings in Mar del Plata here in Argentina, leading up to this weekend's G20 Leaders Summit. And the United States is getting a lot of support that China is trying to have it 9 ways to Sunday here to take advantage of every trade opportunity that they possibly can. And in doing so, really scoop up a lot of intellectual property, ownership in a lot of businesses, and technology transfer that the president really wants to stop. Martha?
John Roberts, thank you very much. In Buenos Aires tonight, here now, Tom Rogan, Washington Examiner commentary writer, and Mark Thiessen, American Enterprise Institute scholar and Fox News contributor. So, Tom, let me start with sort of the big opening question here tonight. There's obviously a lot of focus on what's going on with the Russia investigation and the president's decision not to sit down with Vladimir Putin here. But when you look ultimately at the military expansionism of China and the way that they are trying to basically, clean our clock in every possible category in the coming decades, this is really so central, I think, to what the president's legacy will really ultimately be about.
I think it absolutely will. I mean, the challenge from Russia is a Russia that is in decline, but a Russia that is capable in terms of various spheres. But I also think that when you look at China in terms of the global economic order that it wants to establish, and I think that's important to note, displacing the American rules-based order and replacing it with one that is feudal mercantilism, with Beijing as the center, and then on the second step, the imperial strategy in the Asia-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific, to try and make all those other nations there have to salute essentially Beijing. That showdown is critical, and President Trump, I think, gets very high grades so far in terms of challenging the Chinese in ways that I don't think they would have expected when he first entered office.
Mark, what do you expect this weekend from this meeting?
I expect that Donald Trump is exactly where he is, where he said coming out of the White House today, which is if he gets a deal, if the Chinese want a deal, that's great. If not, he's very happy where he is. I mean, I think Trump has all the leverage going into this meeting for two reasons. Number one, the U.S. economy is booming, whereas China's is stagnating. They've had the worst economic growth this year since 2009. And second of all, the Chinese took their shot at Donald Trump this year. If you recall, after he put his first sanctions down on China, they retaliated very smartly. What they did was they went after Trump voters. They targeted soybeans. 90% of they're the largest soybean importer of the United States, and 90% of the soybeans come from states that voted for Donald Trump. So they were targeting states like North Dakota and Indiana and Missouri, hoping to help Trump's opponents and then maybe have him lose the Senate over these tariffs. And what happened was the opposite. Claire McCaskill lost, Joe Donnelly lost, and Heitkamp lost in North Dakota, and so that play failed. Trump won all of the rural areas in the House. Where his losses were in the suburbs. So the Chinese took their kill shot to try and go after him, and it failed. So what that means is going in, Trump really doesn't mind the sanctions because the Trump voters in those rural states that were depending on China trade backed him in the last election and gave him a mandate to get tough with Beijing.
Yeah, I mean, what fascinates me is that we've been talking about this issue with China for decades. And in terms of having the fortitude to stand up to them, we really have never actually done it. There's an interesting conversation that was outlined in a very interesting Wall Street Journal piece today about the relationship and the back and forth on these deals, and Steve Mnuchin's efforts and Wilbur Ross's efforts to kind of create a negotiating platform that would work. And one of the Chinese advisors told a group of U.S. executives, "We understand the U.S. better than the other way around, and we are willing to endure far more pain without conceding." Tom, do you think that they may have met their match in President Trump or not?
Well, I think they have to a degree, but President Trump has to keep up with this. What the Chinese will do is try and offer some concessions and then break out of them over the following months and years. And so the key for the United States, I think that is absolutely right, that the Chinese play a very long game here. But the key for President Trump is to protect the keystone strengths of American power, which is the rule of law-based international order. Vietnam now loves the United States because the Chinese try and play them. Intellectual property, those high-tech companies that will create the jobs for the growing economy around the world. Protect that, and then in the ultimate long-term interest of the United States, to trust that China's economic model of authoritarianism, of very poor people in the rural areas, of a middle class that is denied freedom, of a Xi Jinping who likes to think he knows rather than the free market best about economic investment. Trust that America will win out, because that's ultimately what won the Cold War, and it will win this Cold War as well.
I mean, you look at the battle over GM. There's also a piece in this story that talks about how the Chinese leadership went around to all the American companies that have businesses there and said, you have to stay with us. You have to stay here in China. We're going to continue to give you advantages if you choose to do that, Mark. That's the on-the-ground battle with these companies. And GM basically made a pretty clear decision this week.
Yeah, they did. And look, Donald Trump has to be tough about that, because the reality is that, and they also do the same thing, quite frankly, with intellectual property, where if you want to do business in the Chinese market, they bring you in and then they make you hand over your intellectual property. I mean, the reality is that, look, the trade wars with the European Union and with Canada, those are wars of choice. Those are we can debate whether or not it's smart to impose sanctions and get into a trade battle with our allies. But China is an economic predator, and I think most people on the left, right, and center, whether they agree with or disagree with how Donald Trump is handling this, recognize that China is a predator country that is stealing our intellectual property, that is rigging the rules of the game, that is imposing massive non-tariff barriers on U.S. economic opportunity in the country, including massive subsidies from the People's Liberation Army and the government into all sorts of sectors where the U.S. can't compete. And so the only way that's not going to get settled through the WTO. And so Donald Trump is saying, I'm going to impose tariffs on you and make it hurt, and that's the only way that we're going to get through to China and make them change their ways.
Well, watching these two head-to-head is fascinating. We remember the Mar-a-Lago dinner, during which the president leaned over at one point and said, by the way, I just sent 50-something missiles into Syria, and here's your cake for dessert. So we'll see what happens in the Buenos Aires. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Great to see both of you tonight. So still ahead this evening, as promised, we will get into this story. Michael Cohen admits to lying about a business deal in Moscow. Was he ever a credible witness in this case to begin with? That's debatable, and we will discuss it on both sides. My next guests have some doubts and some input on this with their own experience, and they will explain what they think about it coming up next.
There's no doubt in my mind that he's just not credible. Before you finish with him, you're going to have such a string of lies, you just can't trust him. And you put him under this kind of pressure, and what's his history been? His history has been lying under pressure.
Insurance that won't replace the full value of your new car? You're better off throwing your money right into the harbor. Gonna regret that.
Day for the Mueller team. Only time really will tell about all of this, but the president's former attorney, Michael Cohen, a man who previously said that he would take a bullet for President Trump, has pleaded guilty to lying to Congress in the Russia probe, saying that he made false statements in 2017 about plans to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Cohen claiming that he did it, quote, to be consistent with individual number one's political messaging and out of loyalty to individual one being President Trump. But Cohen, who looked very weary, to say the least, leaving court today, and understandably so, has been both the president's most fierce ally and now, of course, has turned against him in this case, putting, as he says, his family and his country first. The president sees something else at work here.
What he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about. I mean, we were very open with it.
Here now, Michael Caputo is former Trump 2016 campaign advisor. Michael, welcome back to the program tonight. Your reaction to this news today that Mr. Cohen has said that he lied to Congress about the dates during which he was pursuing a building project, I should say, in Moscow.
I don't think anybody's surprised, really. I mean, even the guy on the other side of the transaction, Felix Sater, was contradicting him all the way in the run-up to this. And those of us who know Michael Cohen, who were around before the campaign, it's not surprising that the one who would never take a bullet for Donald Trump is Michael Cohen. It's a shame, but I got to believe that he's trying to save his skin. That's what the special counsel does. They terrorize people like Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, Jerry Corsi, trying to make you fold, trying to bankrupt you, so that you'll tell the public the narrative that the special counsel wants to put out there. Paul Manafort, Jerry Corsi aren't willing to do that. Well, Michael Cohen is perfectly willing to do so.
All right. Michael, when you look at where this stands right now and you think back to your days involved with the campaign, did you ever hear any discussion? I mean, really, you have to get down to the core of this. And the question is whether or not there was any sort of trade-off. Was it, we're going to do this big project in Moscow, and if we lose the election, then at least we'll have this project going on, and we will have made these introductories and the ability to do business there. Or was it, if Russia leaks, these emails or finds a way to hack into them, then we'll reward you with that. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Is there a quid pro quo, an arrangement, a relationship to help in the election or not?
Well, I was in Trump Tower for a lot of the campaign. I started with the campaign in November of 15, and I was around for a lot of time before that. You know, I probably had more contacts with Russia because I lived there for 7 years than anyone else in Trump Tower. I never heard word one about this magical project in Moscow. You know, Michael Cohen had this portfolio where he was out looking for big deals so he could get the big commissions off of it. And, you know, it looks like another one of those projects that Michael Cohen had, he was kind of famous for, where, you know, the unicorn turned into just another horse here. And he ends up, you know, just getting small cuts on apartments that he sold. This is, you know, par for the course, I think, with Michael Cohen. And unfortunately, he's out there just trying to save his skin. And we don't see any proof of any collusion with Russia at any angle on this whole entire investigation. And today's guilty plea from Michael Cohen doesn't get us any closer to it.
Michael Caputo, thank you very much. Good to have you here tonight. So here now with more on the legal side of this. Thank you. Jonathan Turley joins me now, constitutional law professor at George Washington University. Jonathan, good to have you with us tonight. You know, when you look at what happened today, it's interesting because Robert Mueller turned over the early part of the Michael Cohen investigation to New York, and that had to do with tax issues and financial improprieties. Now, this part is the first time that he sort of has his hands on this chapter in this story with regard to Michael Cohen, and now he comes forward for the second time in all of this and says, I did this because of the campaign, or I did this because I was covering for President Trump. How much did Mueller get from Michael Cohen, do you think, today?
Well, the problem is not what he got, but who he got it from. You know, Michael Cohen has achieved a curious form of perfection. He sometimes seems to have lied every time to everyone about everything. And that makes him what the law sometimes calls a libel-proof individual, someone who has no reputation to lose. And that's not exactly a very credible witness. Now, can a witness like that hurt you? Well, sure. I mean, if he has emails and other things to support him, Mueller is saying that he apparently believes this latest account. But when you boil this down, the risk to the president is hard to discern on the issue of the Trump Tower. There's nothing criminal there. The greatest threat would be if Cohen goes further and says that he not only lied to Congress, but he did so with the knowledge or encouragement of the president. That could be suborning perjury as an allegation, which is a federal crime if you encourage someone to lie. But he hasn't done that yet. So we're not too sure how Mueller is going to use him. Yeah. But what is clear, as you've noted, you know, when they transferred this case to New York, I said at the time that I thought this was a clever tactical move by not just Mueller, but Rosenstein, to guarantee that they couldn't shut down the investigation by shifting this over to New York. It was clear all along that he was being really developed for the special counsel.
So, you know, in terms of, you mentioned the project, and that in and of itself is not illegal. He was a real estate developer. He was building things all around the world, and, you know, had looked into this project clearly, which he talked about himself at the time. And so the timeline, whether or not that ended in January or that ended in June, beside the fact that he didn't tell the truth about that date, is that date material?
Well, the greatest use of that is not that it's a crime clearly defined in the criminal code, but that they will use it as part of a narrative that this was the reason why Trump seemed so favorably inclined towards Russia, and there might have been this quid pro quo. But that's a very loose narrative. You need a lot more than someone like Michael Cohen or these dates to make out that type of allegation. I mean, the problem is the president has denied that he had knowledge about the WikiLeaks issue from Stone, that he had knowledge of the Trump Tower meeting. If Mueller doesn't knock those statements down, and if he does, then we have serious crimes in terms of false statements. But if he doesn't knock those down, it's hard for him to keep this narrative going. You know, it's like not having the corpus delicti. He needs to start with something that is the reason for all of this obstruction and all these other alleged crimes.
Jonathan Turley, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thanks, Martha.
So whatever happened to that congressional hush fund? Do you remember this story? It was used by members of Congress to settle cases of sexual misconduct. Of course, they only have your tax dollars to spend money on, so that's how they did it. So why this is about to become a big issue for Nancy Pelosi.
The life expectancy rate in the U.S. is going down again, and sadly, it's due in part to things that are very preventable. Correspondent Jonathan Serra joins us live from our Atlanta bureau with the troubling statistics tonight. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Brett. CDC officials are describing this report as a wake-up call. They say too many Americans are dying too early, too often, from causes that are usually preventable. The leading factors driving this trend, drug abuse and suicide. In 2017, drug overdoses claimed more than 70,000 lives in the U.S., nearly a 10% increase over the previous year. CDC officials say synthetic opioids play a big role.
We've had troubles with an overdose epidemic for several years now, but the last few years we've seen an increase in fentanyl and fentanyl-like analogs that are extremely dangerous. So we may not have more people using drugs, but the drugs on the street are even more dangerous than they had been.
The suicide rate among working-age Americans increased 34% between the years 2000 and 2016. Many public health officials attribute the increase in overdoses and suicides to what they call an epidemic of despair.
There are complex factors related to, economics and how people are feeling about their life and their future. And it's difficult to address some of these in the traditional medical setting.
The CDC looked at the occupations with the highest suicide rates. For men, construction and extraction, arts and entertainment, and installation and repair had the highest rates. For women, arts and entertainment, protective service, and healthcare support topped the list. Public health experts say targeting suicide prevention efforts to high-risk occupations can help save lives. Employee assistance programs, workplace wellness programs, and online tools, including mental health screenings and education, can help. Federal health officials are also reminding Americans of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is available to anyone online or by phone. The number is 1-800-273-8255 or 1-800-273-TALK. These services are important as ever in light of this new report coming from the CDC, which federal health officials are calling a call to action. Brett?
Put that number on our website as well. Jonathan Serra in Atlanta. Jonathan, thanks. 42 migrants arrested during Sunday's protest that ended in tear gas at the border Tijuana will not be charged. That decision not to prosecute comes despite President Trump's vow that the U.S. will not tolerate lawlessness. Homeland Security Department did release a statement today on the protest saying that most of the 7,000 caravan members do not meet the requirements for claiming asylum and that those ineligible migrants are stretching the resources for those trying to enter the country illegally. Meantime, Border Patrol agents also confirmed they arrested an MS-13 gang member who they say entered the U.S. illegally and was among the caravan members intending to try to seek asylum in the U.S. One of President Trump's cabinet members is under fire for giving what many see as an easy out for an accused pedophile. The Miami Herald broke this story this week about Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta's previous legal decisions when he was U.S. attorney dealing with hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein, who stands accused of sex trafficking underage girls. But it's Epstein's ties to some big names that are also getting headlines, including former President Bill Clinton. Correspondent Jillian Turner with the story.
Alexander Acosta is a rising star in the Trump administration. The Secretary of Labor and only Hispanic cabinet member oversees one of the nation's largest federal agencies. Acosta's name also once appeared on the White House shortlist to replace Attorney General Jeff Sessions, but with increased notoriety has come increased scrutiny. A new Miami Herald investigative report has unearthed court documents that shed light on Acosta's time as a federal prosecutor in Florida during the George W. Bush administration, and a highly unusual deal he struck at the time with one of the nation's most high-profile pedophiles. Jeffrey Epstein, multi-millionaire Palm Beach hedge fund manager, was accused by Palm Beach police of using female recruiters to lure underage girls to his waterfront mansion for, quote, unlawful sexual activity. Epstein's also known for his circle of powerful friends. They include Bill Clinton, with whom he once shared 26 private jet trips, Prince Andrew of the British royal family, and even President Donald Trump, who called Epstein a terrific guy in a 2002 New York Magazine interview. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Before Acosta shuttered the FBI's ongoing investigation and sealed the plea agreement, Epstein faced a life sentence, but he ended up only serving 13 months in state prison. Lawmakers tried to get to the bottom of the notorious deal during Acosta's confirmation hearings last year.
A plea that guarantees that someone goes to jail, that guarantees that someone register generally, is a good thing.
The Department of Labor tells Fox News the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida has defended the actions in this case across 3 administrations. Acosta's allies insist these latest court revelations are political smears, but the controversy isn't over. A pending lawsuit claims Acosta's office violated federal law by failing to inform Epstein's victims of the plea deal. Brett?
Jillian, thank you. President Trump's former fixer is turning on him, what it could mean for the Russia investigation, and where is Mueller headed next? The panel joins me next.
With Advil liquid.
Michael Cohen is lying. He's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. We were thinking about building a building. I decided ultimately not to do it. Even if he was right, it doesn't matter, because I was allowed to do whatever I wanted during the campaign.
He is afraid of the truth and doesn't want Mueller or anyone else to uncover it.
If anything the president has said is true, that there's no there, why are all his closest associates being found guilty of lying about their ties to Russia?
Surprised us, but we're told that the White House knew about it Wednesday night. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein knew about it on Monday, that Michael Cohen was going to appear in court and plead guilty to lying to Congress. U.S. versus Michael Cohen, court filing. Cohen made false statements to both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees to, 1, minimize links between the Moscow project, this is the Trump project in Moscow potential, and individual 1, Trump, and 2, give false impressions that the Moscow project ended before the Iowa caucuses in the very first primary in hopes of limiting the ongoing Russia investigations. The Moscow project was discussed multiple times within the company and did not end in January 2016. Instead, as late as approximately June 2016, Cohen and individual 2, believed to be Felix Sater, discussed efforts to obtain Russian governmental approval for the Moscow project. Now, back in January of 2017, President Trump tweeted this. He also talked about it, but he tweeted this: Russia has never tried to use leverage over me. I have nothing to do with Russia. No deals, no loans, no nothing. Let's bring in our panel. Former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief at USA Today, and Molly Hemingway, Senior Editor at The Federalist. Okay, Ari, your impressions of today, how significant, what it means for the president and the Mueller investigation.
Well, you know, as Charles Krauthammer used to say, this feels like a cover-up of something that is not a crime. There is no underlying issue here that would require somebody or make somebody think they need to lie. What difference does it make if this project ended in January of 2017 or January 2016 or June of 2016? So when Michael Cohen lies about it, what's the purpose? What's the motive? And I can't see any motive here. Why would he do it? There's no underlying crime. There's nothing wrong with a president. It may be unsavory for a person running for the president to do business deals abroad while they're running for president, but it's not a crime.
Susan.
If you want to know whether President Trump thinks this is a serious issue, just look at his response, which has been quite agitated. And he clearly thinks this is a serious story. And I think there's a big difference between January and June, actually, because by June it was clear that Donald Trump was going to be the Republican nominee for president. And at that time, his personal lawyer is reaching out to a Kremlin official for help on a private business deal at a time the Russians are also have a concerted effort to meddle in our presidential election to hurt Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump. That is a web that is being revealed by Special Counsel Mueller. It's not over yet. This isn't the last disclosure we're going to have, but it seems to me that that is a troubling set. That's a troubling context to look at today's plea deal.
Molly.
It's just worth remembering that the special counsel was set up to investigate treasonous collusion with Russia to steal an election, not to investigate whether Donald Trump is a global businessman and was doing business in the year 2016. It is good, though, to hold people accountable for lying to Congress. It is a very bad thing to do. And it's been unfortunate that we've seen so few people held accountable for lying to Congress, even in this Russia story. For instance, Christopher Steele, who built the entire Russia dossier, was referred by the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee almost a year ago because they knew he lied to the FBI. Glenn Simpson gave testimony. He's the guy who was hired by Hillary Clinton to set up the whole Russia story. He gave testimony that was at odds with what Bruce Orr gave, meaning that one or both of them lied to Congress. So it's important that everybody be held accountable for lying to federal officials. It's not even just them. You look at James Clapper, who lied to Congress about spying on everyone, John Brennan, who lied to Congress about spying on Congress, Hillary Clinton, who lied about whether she knew how classified systems worked in her interview with the FBI. So holding people accountable for lying is a good thing. It should be done overall.
Sure. Donald Trump's not, at the time, January 2017, under oath, as he's tweeting that he had no ties, no nothing, no loans, obviously. He's not under oath when he's telling the reporters that he had nothing ever to do with Russia.
But he didn't have business deals with Russia.
Well, it didn't develop, but it was being discussed as it continued on until June, as opposed to January. My point is that is there something here as far as money? We don't know. Deutsche Bank did a lot of his deals. They got raided for the Panama Papers today. There's no tangential. We don't know that it's tied at all. But if there's a money link here, is it beyond then lying to Congress and it's Russia holding something over Donald Trump's head?
But I think you just used the magic words we should all abide by. We don't know. We don't know. And the problem I have with this town is when people don't know, it doesn't stop them from talking. They make the worst accusations they can make against people in public life who they do not like, even if they do not know any of the underlying facts, is what Senator Schumer did today, which is what Senator Warner did today.
But I'm saying to you, I'm asking you, where potentially could it go?
I'm not willing to speculate because only Bob Mueller will know that. And I don't think any of us should try to put ourselves in Mueller's shoes and speculate it's one way or another. If Mueller's got the goods, Mueller will deliver the goods and we'll judge at that time. If he doesn't, this town owes Donald Trump a huge apology for 2 years.
And is there a sense, Susan, in this town that it's coming to a head, that it comes before Christmas, perhaps?
I think there is a sense that Robert Mueller seems to be closer and closer to making a report on some aspects of his investigation. His investigation is not going to end then, but the aspects involving President Trump most directly that we've been so curious about. Something else is going to happen in January, and that is Democrats in the House are going to gain the power to have hearings and demand testimony and subpoena documents. And the question you just raised about did Russia launder money through the Trump Organization, that's been one of the things that's been speculated about. That is a specific issue that Adam Schiff, the new chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said today he is going to start pursuing as soon as he's able.
Molly.
We don't start with finding, we don't say, here's the person, find me the crime. We look for crimes and then we determine what should be done about it. And there has been so much crazy speculation without any evidence of a crime. And yet we actually have evidence of all sorts of criminal things, like criminal leaking of classified information against Trump officials, lying to a FISA court, all sorts of problems like this that aren't even being worried about by people who think, well, if we just keep digging, maybe we can finally get Trump. How about we deal with actual crimes and start investigating those?
All right, I'm going to play this protection of Special Counsel Mueller. First from the minority leader now, Chuck Schumer.
This idea that we don't need to pass legislation to protect the special counsel because there's no way President Trump will interfere with the investigation is flat out absurd.
Our job here should be to protect Robert Mueller so that he can do his job. And he can do his job not for him, but for the American people.
Bob Mueller has been left alone. I think he's going to continue to be left alone. If I was really, really stressed about Bob Mueller, I'd do something. I'm not worried about Bob Mueller.
All right, the president has said he's not firing Bob Mueller. Matt Whitaker has said he doesn't have any plans to get rid of Bob Mueller. But there is really an effort on Capitol Hill to protect Bob Mueller.
From what? I mean, if Donald Trump and Acting Attorney General Whitaker were threats to the Mueller probe, then why did Bob Mueller get the plea agreement with Michael Cohen? He had no problems getting that. No one's interfering with him. No one's cutting his budgets. No one's even going to say you're laid off in case the government closes down. So It's an unconstitutional move in the first place, which is why I oppose it as somebody who used to work in the White House. Congress does not have the power to tell the president you can or cannot fire somebody who is an inferior officer in the executive branch. So it's unconstitutional. And I don't know how you can say you're trying to defend Bob Mueller and the Constitution by passing an unconstitutional law.
All right, we're going to talk about this and a little G20 right after the break.
I probably will be meeting with President Putin. We haven't terminated that meeting. I was thinking about it, but we haven't. They'd like to have it. I think it's a very good time to have the meeting. I'm getting a full report on the plane as to what happened with respect to that, and that will determine what I'm going to be doing.
Well, President Trump did get that full report on Air Force One, and a few moments later, when he was on the plane, he tweeted out, based on the fact that the ships and sailors have not been returned to Ukraine from Russia, I've decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting in Argentina with President Vladimir Putin. I look forward to a meaningful summit again as soon as this situation is resolved. Back with the panel quickly. Susan, thoughts on this?
Skeptical, maybe, about the stated reason. Perhaps it was related to the awkwardness that might have ensued if he had met with President Putin in the immediate aftermath of this plea bargain.
Ukraine, though, is a situation, and they're making a firm stance on the situation with that.
Yeah, for people who believe in the Russia conspiracy theory, I guess they would think that this was tied to that. For people who watched what Trump has done with Russia for the last 2 years, this is perfectly in keeping with it, and it's a really appropriate reaction. It's not an overreaction, but it's letting them know we take this seriously. They need to step up. Europe obviously needs to respond to what's happened in the region, and we are doing a good job of supporting them.
The biggest meeting, though, could be the one with President Xi of China. And what comes out of those negotiations, Ari?
This is consequential, and it's going to last a long time, the implications of this trade war we're in with China, and whether or not President Trump is the one who can get China to stop stealing, to behave the way a nation should behave in international order, particularly when it comes to trade, intellectual property, and how deep they reach into Americans' pockets when Americans want to do business in China. Everybody knows that's the price. They steal from you, and you put up with it. They're a rogue nation when it comes to playing by the rules. If Donald Trump's trade war, doing things that I was taught you just don't do, enacting tariffs, turns out to back China down and get them to behave, this is a monumental consequence.
You know, Susan, he said going to the plane, you know, maybe I like it the way it is. You know, yesterday, Larry Kudlow said, there's a chance we're going to do a deal. The market shot up. He says, well, maybe I like the tariffs the way they are. The market shots down. You know, Donald Trump's negotiating here before he sits down with President Xi.
So if it works, it's going to be great. You're right, a big achievement. If it doesn't work, we're heading into a big trade war with China that could have some real economic consequences, not just for the Chinese, for Americans too.
But the Chinese would feel it as well. I mean, everybody in China is concerned about that.
And to Ari's point, there was a study that came out 2 weeks ago that showed of the 25% tariffs that we've levied, Chinese producers have had to pay the bulk of that, literally 20% of it, where American producers are having to do just a tiny fraction of that. It's because they chose really good products with price elasticity so that we could handle it much better than China. That might not be the case if the trade war ramps up, but this is a very good position for the U.S. to be in going into a negotiation, or we might squeeze them a little more.
Important to know that as that first panel, it's going to get a lot of coverage. These are big things that will affect everybody. Thank you all. When we come back, a final tribute to one of America's heroes. Finally tonight, one Vietnam veteran may be gone, but he certainly is not forgotten. Private First Class Stanley Stoltz was reported to have no known family. And when he died, there was concern over his funeral being a very lonely one. Well, his funeral notice went viral, and more than 400 people, including some family and old friends, came to Omaha National Cemetery to attend the service for the 73-year-old veteran. The flag on Stoltz's casket will now be flown at that cemetery on Memorial Day. So that's a great story about America. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. The story, hosted by Martha, starts right now. Hey, Martha.
Hey there.